The Wheel in Space suffers from the indignity of being at the end of Doctor Who's 5th season. From September 1967 to June 1968, contemporary audiences were treated to week after week of consistent high-quality science fiction storytelling. The informed fan consensus is that this run of excellence stutters to a halt with The Wheel in Space, blemishing an otherwise great season. However, it's hard to imagine what could theoretically follow the enemy of the world, the web of fear and fury from the deep, and not inevitably seem like a disappointment in comparison. Therefore, the story's covert characterization and atmospherics are lost on other sections of the audience. This situation is not helped by the fact that 4 of the serial's 6 episodes do not exist. For the purposes of this review, I listened to the 2012 CD soundtrack release and watched the Telesnap reconstruction alongside the existing episodes 3 and 6. The purpose of this is that often my opinions of a story vary wildly when viewed in a different medium. Experiencing the story in both these formats allowed me to streamline my thoughts, as well as pick up on additional visual cues that are not apparent in the soundtrack's linking and narration. One criticism aimed at the story is its apparent glacial pacing, with episode 1 and 2 usually being at the target of this negativity. Episode 1 has an atmosphere that is unique to the rest of the serial, as much of the action focuses on the Doctor and Jamie's exploration of the apparently abandoned silver carrier. The episode sells the danger of the situation well, with moments such as the Doctor reflecting on them being merely base flotsam, conveying the creepy notion of isolation in space. This is supported by the excellent sound design by Brian Hodgson and the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. Its ambient tones and discordant melodies convey the character's isolation without ever being overstated. Later stories such as The Ark in Space and more recently A Wild Blue Yonder were able to use the notion of being on an apparently deserted spaceship as a platform for greater character moments and world building. But The Wheel in Space uses it to suggest how isolation in space can impact a person's mental state, which is explored later on in the story. Episode 1's cliffhanger is also a clever misdirection, as much of the marketing at the time and on contemporary releases focuses on the appearance of the Cybermen. David Whittaker's restraint is to be admired, as by establishing a new threat to the protagonists at episode 1's conclusion, the supposed destruction of the silver carrier, further tension is built, so much so that the glimpse of a Cyberman's hand bursting from a sphere at episode 2's cliffhanger is enough to generate excitement about how the monsters will impact the ongoing narrative. This also means that episode 2 gives time to carefully establish the character dynamics of the crew on the Wheel. Unlike the cookie-cutter characters of the Moon Base and the Tomb of the Cybermen, Whittaker's gift for characterization means that this is not time wasted. One immediate point of interest is the mirror place between the Wheel commanders Jarvis Bennett and Gemma Corwin and their younger second-in-command Leo Ryan and Tanya Lernoff. Initially, the serial positions Jarvis and Leo to be of the same ilk, as in episode 2 they are both dismissive of the concerns raised by Gemma Corwin and Tanya. However, this dynamic then shifts as the danger becomes more apparent and there is a divide between the older and younger generations, as it is Leo and Tanya who eventually take charge of the situation, while the others succumb to the Cybermen, or collapsing under the mental strain of the ordeal. This serial's suggestion of romantic chemistry between Leo and Tanya is also somewhat understated, which works in its favour, as the little moments, such as Enrico's snide grimace at Leo's expense after Tanya's joke in episode 3, catch you off guard and remind you that these are human beings with emotional trappings but caught in an extraordinary situation, which I think is really good of the writer and the cast to be able to showcase. This then raises the central theme, conflict between logic and humanity. The Cybermen's role in the story is to act as the ultimate extension of the former, relying on the principles of logic to get into the wheel in order to take over the station to act as a launch pad for their invasion of Earth. Whereas the human characters on the wheel seem to exist in a state of permanently questioning the conundrum of logic over humanity, as what they have always known is challenged by the episode's events. This dilemma is most acutely articulated through the characters of Jarvis Bennett, and the incoming companion introduced in the story is Zoe Herriot, played by Wendy Padbury. It is Zoe who most excels when forced to question the logic and facts she is usually surrounded by, not only for narrative purposes, but to imply a clear metaphor between the human characters and the Cybermen. This is exemplified in the dialogue directed towards Zoe, such as "all brain and no heart," and her first encounter with the Doctor, who states that logic merely enables one to be wrong with authority. It is because of the human characters' questioning of logic and authority in the story that makes them better human beings who are able to overcome the story's threat. That the reliance on logic, fact and precision would make them narrow-minded and incapable of empathy, like the Cybermen. The serial then takes the opposite approach with the wheel commander Jarvis Bennett, whose reliance on logic and fact is a catalyst for the character's mental deterioration when presented with a scenario that cannot be explained by either fact or logic. This is because the first half of the serial makes it explicit how much crew of the wheel are dependent on logic as a coping mechanism in deep space, which could be read as the characters masking their own insecurities.
Out in space, human beings have got to rely on routines, ordinariness. Confuse them and you got trouble.
Yes.
This subtext then becomes the narrative's dominant reading of the character when he starts to mentally unravel during episode 4, when it becomes apparent that the Cybermen are a major threat to the wheel. The story then brings the character full circle, with Jarvis's death in episode 6 being a self-sacrifice, the epitome of a human and emotionally based act. In terms of the story's antagonists, the Cybermen, their minimal appearance allows Whittaker's characterization skills to shine, but is also able to maintain an aura of malevolence around other creatures. Alongside characterization, writer David Whittaker's other main skill is knowing how to better utilize a monster. See Season 4's The Power of the Daleks for proof of this. The Cybermen are presented as emotionless monoliths operating in the shadows, effectively a dispatch of anyone who wishes to interrupt their plans. The scene following Chang's death in episode 4, where the crew notice an unlicensed use of the loading bay incinerator, is genuinely unsettling, as the story leaves ambiguous whether the characters realise the reason for its use. In addition, in episode 5, where a character is killed by the Cybermen, with nothing but the monotone throb that accompanied the monsters in the background appears stark and is very atmospheric on the story's audio release. One wonders how this would look if the scene in question existed, as well as how scary it might have appeared to children in 1968. Utilising the Cybermen in this fashion means that their USP as cold, emotionless killers is maintained. From their perspective, none of the aforementioned deaths are for self-aggrandizement, which could arguably be the case when the Daleks shout "exterminate" before killing, but a necessary stepping stone to ensure the success of their invasion of the wheel. Furthermore, the mystery of what could be in the spheres is sewn really nicely into the first 2 episodes, even though other camera scripts make it obvious that this is how other Cybermats are transported into the wheel. Once again, Whittaker's capability as a brilliantly subtle writer are shown, because in episode 1 we are shown these mysterious egg-like spheres escaping the silver carrier, and then in episode 2 we hear references to a mysterious object hitting the outer skin of the space station. Then, as Jamie finds a way to deactivate the laser at the end of episode 2, we are informed via the telesnaps and linking a narration that there is a piece of corroded beryllium. one of the things which the Cybermen targets in order to render the laser useless. This helps to convey the creeping menace of the Cybermen slowly taking over the wheel, which I find brilliant. The sort of thing that a moon-based style animation would be really effective at showing. One of the reasons that to this day the wheel in space suffers from a poor reputation is the fact that 4 out of the 6 episodes do not exist, with the existing 2 episodes having excellent direction from Tristan Devere Cole, but missing some of the subtler character moments that are present in the other episodes. At the time of recording, there has been no major official animation project announced, though 8 minutes of episode 1 were animated as a showcase to potential investors for the BFI, and there has been no news of any episodes being returned. Despite my praise of the story, the fact it has a popular monster, as well as limited characters and sets, in addition to 2 surviving episodes, providing excellent reference and material, which would make it a more than ideal choice for animation. However, no such undertaking has occurred, which to me is very telling. From the information available online, the Wheel in Space was sold in the same batch as The Web of Fear, The Enemy of the World, and The Abominable Snowman and Fury from the Deep, being shipped to Australia and New Zealand, Singapore, Hong Kong, Nigeria and Gibraltar, with the majority either junking their prints or returning them to the BBC. It is suspected that the surviving episode 3 was one of the Singapore prints, and episode 6 was found in the British Film Library. It has been 13 years since The Enemy of the World and The Web of Fear have been found, and with multiple reports of episodes existing in private hands, I think there is a very small chance that the Wheel in Space could be out there somehow. Even getting to see one more episode would help to shed light on the aforementioned positives of the story, which would allow for it to be more fairly judged amongst fan circles. If this story is eventually picked up for animation, I would prefer it to lean into the narrative's shadowy atmospheric undertones. Overall, The Wheel in Space is an unfairly maligned Doctor Who story that I would someday love to see in its entirety, which I rate 8 out of 10.